We are beginning an interim class, I'll call it that. Bobby last week finished up his class on Christian ethics. And so for the month of December, on the Wednesday nights when weather will allow us to assemble, we're going to be talking about, as you look at the top of the worksheet, if you've got one, you can see the title of the class, Folks Who Got It Right, and then in parentheses, and wrong, because if we have opportunity, we'll talk about a few in each category. And we're just looking at Bible characters that did things that we should emulate and things we should be warned about, both those categories. And they're not particularly random, although tonight we are talking about Rahab, and some might think that's kind of random, but I think you'll agree with me by the time we're done, there's a whole lot we can learn from Rahab. And that's going to be December. Of course, I'm teaching on Sunday morning 1 Samuel, which will go into January and February. And Mike has got a class now ready on Leviticus that he will be teaching on Wednesdays, but it won't begin until in January. So we'll finish out the year with this class and move into Leviticus on Wednesday night in January and finish out 1 Samuel. All right, reading from Joshua chapter 2, verses 1 to 21. So if you've got your Bible open there, let's make a couple of reading assignments or a few reading assignments. Somebody for 1 through 7. Who would like to read 1 through 7? All right, Charles. Excellent. And then 8 down through, let's say, 14. There's another hand, John. And then 15 through, what did I say, 21. That'll wrap it up. Who's going to take the wrap-up reading? Anybody? I say a hand. Oh, all right. You got it. We are ready to read. So who do we get for the Charles? And then John, and then Shannon. We're good to go, guys. Appreciate it.
Then Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men as spies secretly from Shittim, saying, "Go view the land, especially Jericho." So they went and entered the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and rested there. But it was told to the king of Jericho, saying, "Behold, men from the sons of Israel have come here tonight to spy out the land." And the king of Jericho sent word to Rahab, saying, "Bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to spy out all the land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I do not know where they were from. It came about when it was time to shut the gate at dark that the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them." But she had brought them up to the roof and hidden them in the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued them on the road to the Jordan, to the crossing places, and as soon as those who were pursuing them had gone out, they shut the gate.
Before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that, as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death." And the men said to her, "Our life for yours, even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you."
So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house that she lived in was part of the city wall. Now she had said to them, "Go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there for 3 days until they return, and then go on your way." The men said to her, "This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless when we enter the land you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother and brothers and all your family into your house. If anyone goes outside your house into the street, his blood will be on his own head. We will not be responsible. As for anyone who is in the house with you, his blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear." "Agreed," she replied. "Let it be as you say." So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window.
Very good. Thank you guys for doing that. All right, number one, Rahab was a blank. She was also a blank. On top of these two things, she was also a blank. How would you fill in any of those blanks? By the way, as far as I'm concerned, any order you want to fill them out, what would you put in one of them? She was a harlot? That kind of stands out to us, doesn't it? Wow, this woman's a harlot. Smart woman. Well, that's two words, and we don't have enough blanks. So harlot is one. What's another one? I've already said it. What? She was a woman. What was she? What would be the third thing? Gentile. Yes, she was a Gentile. So she's a Gentile, she's a woman, and she's a harlot. I thought about adding she's a Canaanitess, because she's one of the Canaanite people, but Gentile, I guess, covers that well enough. Although there were a lot of Gentiles that weren't Canaanites. But it's interesting to me to think about her in that context, in that light, based on what she's doing. Number two, Rahab made her home in Jericho, apparently living on the blank of the city. Wall, that's what it says. And I used to wonder if it was on the wall or in the wall. I looked more closely at the text for the answer to that, and it said on the wall. So, okay, on the wall. Blank sent 2 spies who came to lodge under her roof. Joshua sent 2 spies. Where's Moses? He has gone on to his reward. Number 3, someone reported Rahab to the blank of Jericho, to the king of Jericho. There was a king in Jericho, saying that the sons of Israel had come to spy out the land, and they were at her house. Tattletale. Wonder if there's a Canaanite word for tattletale. Number 4, Rahab, rather than hand them over to the king, blanked them, hid them under some flax on her roof. And then, that naughty girl, she led the king's servants away by telling them that the men had left town around dark when the gate was being shut, and that they should pursue them. Oh man, if you'll hurry, you might catch them. Number 5, she offered several blank to the spies for her willingness to blank herself by defying the king. I don't really expect you to know what to put in these blanks, but do you have any idea what would go in the first one? Oaths? There was an oath, but that's not what I'm thinking of here. She offered several reasons to the spies for her willingness to blank herself by defying the king. What was she doing by defying the king? She was endangering herself. Could you imagine? Of course, it's speculation. Nothing in the text says what would happen, but what do you think the king would have done if he'd have found out this woman was lying to him? I mean, she's a harlot. She's lying to the king about potential enemies of Jericho. She's a sellout. She's a traitor. But she was willing to do that. And she offered 5 reasons. Those reasons are, and these are right from the text, she knew the blank had given Israelites the land. The Lord. Now that's how it's written in the text. If you take a look at what it says, verse 9, chapter 2, verse 9. I know that the Lord has given you the land. What does she know of the true and living God? I don't know. There's no elaboration. There's no extra information. But she's calling him the Lord in this case. Number B. The blank of the Israelites had fallen on Jericho's inhabitants. The terror. You could put fear. Some translations would probably have fear. But the terror of the Israelites had fallen on Jericho's inhabitants. Number C, the Canaanites had blanked before the Israelites. It's in the text. They had melted away. Does that remind you of when Saul was waiting for Samuel to show up? And the Israelites were waiting or melting away, waiting for Samuel. Number D, they had heard how the Lord blanked the water of the Red Sea. Dried up. He dried up the water of the Red Sea. Number E, they had heard what the Israelites did to the blank of the blank on the east side of the Jordan. Who was on the east side of the Jordan that they encountered before they came into the promised land? What would you put in those two blanks? The two kings, Sihon and Og. You could put Sihon and Og. Those are their names. But the text says the two kings. We heard what you did to the two kings of the Amorites on the far side of the Jordan, which would be the east side of the Jordan, across the Jordan. So she had heard all these things. And she's offering up to them to say, this is why I'm doing this. We've heard all this stuff. We're scared to death. So I'm hiding you on the roof under my flax. Number 6, the basis of Rahab's blank. What does she express in all of this? What is she expressing? Faith. She's expressing faith. The basis of Rahab's faith seems to be that she blanked of what God had done. You could put knew, but she heard. That's what she says. We have heard. We have heard. We have heard. We've heard how these things happened. And so she blanked in him. She believed. She heard and she believed. A lot of interesting things we could talk about. All right, number 7. And this is more, no blank here. What agreement did Rahab make with the spies? He's talking Latin to us now. I'll save you, you save me. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. You gotta help me out here. See, this woman, she's not thinking, well, there might be something happen. No, she is convinced that God has given the land, not just the city, she said the land, to the Israelites. Where did she get that idea, the land? How did she get it in her head that God's given them the land? Interesting. And so she's endangering herself by hiding these guys, and now she's making a deal because she knows what's coming. Somehow she knows.
You might infer that her profession makes her privy to a lot of talk. What are the streets saying? What are people talking about?
Right.
So that's what I always thought.
I don't know where Paul's getting this idea, but he's talking about her profession being something that might infer that she knew what was happening on the street. So didn't mean to infer anything, but I'm messing with you. But anyway, that's very possible. It's kind of like I've heard that happens in beauty. What happens in beauty salons? Get your hair cut, yeah. Come on, Billy, of all people in here. Gossip. And there's probably some talk that takes place in a harlot's house. Yes, John.
Is that Og the giant?
I don't remember if that was him or not. There was a giant that had a bed that was...
And giant, but I was wondering, because that's the only Og I remember mentioned in the Bible.
I don't remember. There's our research question for next week. Yeah, come on now. Take a look at Og, not right now, but later, and we'll see if he's the guy that had the big bed. All right, where were we here? What agreement had Rahab made with the spies? That's what we were talking about. Any details? How did they get out of her house? How did they get out of town? Had a rope, apparently a scarlet rope, that she put out her window, and they went down the scarlet cord and got away. And she tells the king, hey, they went out the city gate. So she's already misdirecting the king's servants. Now, it wasn't the king that showed up, but his servants apparently. The king sent word to her to turn those guys over, and she told whoever came, you got to get to the gate. It's about the time the gate closed, they were leaving. If you run, you might catch them. But she's already got them hidden on the roof, and now she puts them out the window on the side of the wall. Tells them to go hide themselves in the hill country for 3 days. And that's what they do. When the Israelites come back, what are they going to look for? Look for that scarlet rope hanging out the window, and it says in the text, she immediately fastened that rope. I guess because she didn't know when they were coming back. And this is interesting. What did God do to cause the capture of Jericho? All right, they marched around the city, and then what happened? The walls fell down. There was at least one place where the wall did not fall down. And I don't know how much of the walls around that city fell, but the wall of Jericho's house did not fall. The wall at Jericho's house. The wall at Rahab's house did not fall. Number 8, what of Rahab's help? What about that? Did God or the Israelites need Rahab's help? Could the city have been taken without Rahab's help? I'm just trying to think through some of this stuff. There's not an answer for any of it, but I think it's worthy of our thinking through. Did God need Rahab? Okay. She was willing. She put herself in the Lord's hands. She found herself in a situation where she could do something. Not only could she do something for the spies, who else could she do something for? For herself. So, I read this and I think these two spies went to her house, and it kind of makes sense. If you're trying to be low key, you might go someplace like that where nobody would suspect anything would be amiss. A couple of strangers come into town where they immediately, they go to a prostitute's house. Well, it makes sense. Oh yeah, the strangers coming into town. That might be the reason they did that. It doesn't say that in the text. But is it mere coincidence that they wind up in the home of a woman, don't know if she's the only one in town, but a woman who knows all these things, and having heard these things about Israel, has come to faith in God to the extent that she's willing to endanger her life and probably the welfare of her family by hiding spies that come into town. Part of us knows that God doesn't need her to accomplish his will, but there she was. Does God need me to accomplish his will? Does God need you to accomplish his will? I'm not asking because I think there's an answer to that question. It's more complicated.
I think we might use this to accomplish what his desires are.
Okay. Well, what if we say no? If we say no, we don't want to accomplish what God wants us to do, does that mean it's not going to get accomplished, or will he find somebody else? See, here's why I'm asking this. I read this text, and it's like out of the blue, here's this lady, and they wind up in her house. How did they wind up in her house? I bet you there was more than one prostitute in Jericho, but they wind up in her house. And this woman is one who's heard all these things about Israel. She's so convinced that God is the God to whom the land is going to be controlled, to give it to the Israelites, that she is going to hide the Israelite spies and lie about what they've done so she can get them out safely and make a deal with them, because she thinks in her mind this is the only way her family will find any salvation. Are there any parallels in the New Testament here? What parable did Jesus tell about the kingdom of heaven being like a treasure hidden in a field? What do you do when you find that treasure? You sell everything you've got and you get that treasure. To me, that's what she's doing. She's giving up everything. Wow, we're going to die if we don't avail ourselves of this opportunity, if I don't avail myself of this opportunity to save myself and my family. And she's thinking about her family as well as herself. She names them specifically. I want you to save me, my mom, my dad, my brothers, my sisters, the whole clan. And they didn't stammer or stutter about that. They said, yeah, everybody, you can get in this house. Isn't that interesting? No question about their worth, their worthiness, their value, their age, their education. Just everybody, you can get in this house. It's almost like the church. If we can get you in the church, you'll be all right. If we can get you in the ark, you'll be all right. If we can get you in Rahab's house, you'll be all right. You ever heard the church compared to Rahab's house? Who's in Rahab's house? Bunch of sinful Gentiles. Who's in the Choctaw Church of Christ? Becky.
I've never read the story focused on that it was Rahab herself, but I have read it in the context that her profession is not an esteemed one. Her life, the way she had her livelihood, it was not an esteemed one. To where it's not all butterflies and rainbows. This gospel is for everybody, everywhere, no matter who you are, and it is so powerful that you want it to save everything.
Exactly.
It's just not willy-nilly.
And we tend to separate ourselves from others based on things like that. It's natural. I say natural in the sense that we are people of flesh, and that's kind of what the flesh does. And it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're going to find some way to compete and find a way to set yourself above. If you're in the military, what branch of the military are you in? And whatever branch you're in, you're going to make fun of all the others, because that's what you do when you're in the military. But if you're in the same branch of the military as the next guy, you're going to make fun of whatever shop he's working out of. Oh, you maintenance guys. Oh, you clerical guys. You admin guys. Whatever it is. Those security. Everybody hates the security police, so that's all right. That's the way it is. I remember reading about an experiment a teacher had in class. She divided the kids up based on their eye color. And she said it was fascinating how quickly you could become a bad guy by having brown eyes or blue eyes, depending on what the eye color of the day was. That's just kind of the way we are. But here's a woman who was a prostitute, who had faith. But what was the basis of her faith? The things she had heard. What's the basis of faith today? The things we hear. What Jesus say to do? Go into all the world, tell them the gospel, let them hear the gospel message. And the gospel message will resonate with people who are looking for God. That's the way it works. Number 9, where else in the Bible can we read of Rahab? The first reference, of course I didn't put the books in there, but it's in the book, the 4th chapter of this book. And you don't have to go too far, it's in Ruth chapter 4. And I put sort of, because you don't really read about Rahab by name, but there she is. I'll show you what I mean. This is a book of Ruth, chapter 4, verse 16. Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. Who was Naomi? Well, who was Ruth? What's their relationship? Naomi is Ruth's mother-in-law. Naomi had the boys that died, and one daughter-in-law left. Ruth is the daughter-in-law that stayed. Whither thou goest, I will go. Your God will be my God, your people will be my people. That's what Ruth said to Naomi. So she stays with her, and she marries this guy named Boaz, has a child with Boaz, and that's the child that Naomi has laid in her lap and for whom she has become his nurse. Verse 17, the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. Actually a grandson, but. So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. To Perez was born Hezron, to Hezron was born Ram, to Ram was born Amminadab, to Amminadab was born Nahshon, to Nahshon Salmon, to Salmon was born Boaz. And who married Boaz? Ruth, or Rahab. Rahab, I got to keep these R girls straight. Rahab married Salmon. Yeah, that's the way it goes. And then Ruth married Boaz. And then Boaz, he had Obed, and Obed had Jesse, and Jesse had David. So whose line are we talking about? We're talking about the line of Christ. Rahab is Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. Back down the line, she's in his family line. Go to Matthew chapter 1. I always get confused when I'm talking about genealogies. Matthew chapter 1, verses 3 to 5. Judah was the father of Perez, Zerah by Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram. By the way, you remember that mess with Tamar? She deceived Judah into getting her to be with child by dressing up like a what? Like a prostitute and sitting by the road, and he didn't know it was her. You talk about... This is God's book, and he's telling us what happened. He's telling us the way things are. He doesn't cover stuff up. He's letting us know, yeah, these are my people too. That's why I'm sending my son. There's no other hope for anybody on this planet except my son Jesus. I'm sending him down there. You better listen to him. You better hear him. Ram was the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. Rahab is one of 4 women mentioned in Jesus' genealogy. Actually 5 if you count Mary. But there she is. But we're not done. We've also got Hebrews chapter 11. What's the 11th chapter of Hebrews all about? Faith. People who lived in faith. And this is what Hebrews chapter 11 verse 31 says. By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. Now, do you think the Holy Spirit could have been a little kinder and a little less revealing if he'd have just said Rahab? But no, he fills in the blank. I think God wants us to realize Rahab. Rahab the who? Rahab the harlot. Rahab the harlot. This goes back to what Becky was talking about. She didn't perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. By what? By faith. Why did she have faith? Because she heard what God had done. And she allowed the things that she heard that God had done create in her a faith in God. A faith that provoked her to action, to do something. Not just to sit around, well, I believe in God, I hope things go well. John?
Her lies okay?
Make her lies okay?
Yeah, she lied saying that the spy, she didn't do that, so does that make it okay that she did that?
Well, we'll have to ask God about that on the judgment day. I'm sure we'll be concerned. First question, Lord, what about that? Didn't Rahab tell some lies? I think about 2 Thessalonians. When I think about that, this is what 2 Thessalonians says. Probably should have marked it. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And remember what the Hebrew writer just said. Rahab did not die along with who? Along with the disobedient. She did not die along with the disobedient. So 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 says this. Let's see. Let's do verse 10. We're breaking into the middle of a thought, but I think it'll be enough. And with all deception of wickedness for those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth so as to be saved. For this reason, God will send upon them a deluding influence so that they will believe what is false, in order that they all may be judged who did not believe the truth, but took pleasure in wickedness. This is the nature of the Canaanites. Remember what God told Abraham back in chapter 15 of Genesis? He's telling him what's going to happen in the future. You're going to give you a son. We're going to make of him children like the sand of the sea and like the stars in the sky. And I'm going to bring them into a land, but it's not going to happen for a long time. Why? Because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. By the way, those two kings, remember those two kings? The two kings of the Amorites. Before they even crossed the river, they were wiping out Amorites. And God says, your cup of iniquity is full. I'm tired of it. I'm sick of it. I'm wiping you out with my people. I'm bringing them into this land that you haven't appreciated. And so now the Hebrew writer speaks of Rahab. She's saved by her faith because she was not going to perish with the disobedient. And Paul writes to the church at Thessalonica, and he talks about this principle. If you don't love the truth, if you don't want to obey the truth, God will send you a deluding influence. And so in this context, I hesitate to say it's okay to lie if it's for the truth. Well, wait a minute. But we see God sends a deluding influence. It's the same thing in Romans chapter 1. Those who give up on God, God gives them over to a reprobate mind to believe things that are nuts. And that's exactly what we're seeing happen in our country today. People are believing the most crazy things. Imagine, well, you couldn't even imagine. Yes?
It's for all people.
Absolutely. As a matter of, now that you mentioned that, that's our segue into the next book is James, chapter 2. James chapter 2. And this is what we've got to read there. Verse 23, and the scripture was fulfilled, which says, and Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as what? As righteousness. What does that mean? Was Abraham righteous? No. So what did God do to consider him righteous? He counted him righteous by virtue of his faith. That's what James is talking about. And then he says this, verse 24, or well, the end of verse 23 is, and he was called the friend of God. And then it goes into 24, you see that a man is justified by works and not by faith alone. In the same way was not, who? Rahab. Now hold on here, James. Can you do that? Can you talk about Father Abraham, esteemed, revered, regarded on a high pedestal, Father Abraham, in the same breath that you're talking about Rahab, and say that they're on an equal plane here as far as salvation goes? Is that what James is doing? That's exactly what he's doing. In other words, Abraham is no more deserving than Rahab. Both of them are being saved by what? Their faith. But is it faith only? It's faith with their works. There probably were, and this is just pure speculation, there were probably some other people in Jericho that believed that it's up for us. We're all going to die. Because they believed what they had heard about God as well. I'm just thinking there's probably at least one other person. But did they do anything about it? Apparently not. But Rahab did. And James is making the argument here, same with Abraham. Their faith is what God counted as righteousness, but their faith was perfected by their works. And the point I want us to see here is when James writes this out, he's saying Abraham is saved by faith, but so is Rahab. And we're talking about faith that was perfected by what they did. So Rahab, she's not just in one place in the Old Testament. What she did there is kind of like what God says about Abel. What did he say about Abel? Though he is dead, yet he speaks. His righteousness, the record of his righteousness speaks to us today. And when we read about Rahab, her faith speaks to us today. Her courage speaks to us today. Her, what's the word for getting up and doing something about the situation? Is there a word for that? Initiative. That's the word I'm looking for. Her initiative is speaking to us today. Do something about your situation. And you and I, we've got all kinds of advice for people who are in situations, don't we? We see other people, oh man, if I was them, I'd do this. If I was them, I'd do that. And we never think to ask anybody, what if you were me? What would you do if you were me? Because we need to do things with our lives. And Rahab did. And she, I think, is a very excellent testimony for me to do something with what I know to be the truth. Don't let it just sit there, but do something with it. All right, anything else we need to cover over Rahab here? Any other observations or questions? Yes, Charles.
When I read about Rahab, I think, and sometimes this is a comforting thought, and sometimes it's a scary thought, but there is nothing that any of us can do to escape the will of God. He'll use us for or against, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like that about her, the Bible makes it very clear that she wasn't the most moral person in the world. But without her, where would we be?
Exactly. And think about this. You can't read between the lines too much. But does she fade off into obscurity after she's rescued from Jericho along with her family? Is that what happens to her? Who does she marry? The guy was kind of fishy. His name was Salmon. Okay, little Pisces humor there. But think about this. She married Salmon. You think he was Gentile? I don't think so. Now think about it. She's a harlot. She's a Gentile. She's a Canaanite Gentile. And somehow she meets Salmon and love is in the air. They get married. They have a child. Who's their child? I know it's hard to keep up with. Who was it? And it comes down to, wow, she has married into the line of Christ. So there had to be some redeeming quality about this lady that came out. I don't know. I don't know that we're ever going to be interested in this stuff when we get to heaven. But I do believe this about heaven, and I believe this, one of the reasons I believe it is because of the Mount of Transfiguration. I think we're going to know people in heaven. And I think it's going to be automatic. I don't think we're going to have to say, hi, I'm Marty, what's your name again? I hope it's not like that because I can never remember anybody's name. I'll write it down, and when I forget where I put it. I think we're just going to know each other. I think we'll know as we are known. I believe that's Scripture. So there's going to be something like that. It's going to be, if you ever watch Star Trek, maybe we'll be like the Borg, only the good side of the Borg, because you just become part of the whole. Harold and then Paul. Oh, you hit your hand up a while ago, and I missed you, brother. Harold?
Well, I think Rahab is an example. All of us, I have sinned. All of us need to repent. And when we do it the way the Lord has given us instructions, there's forgiveness.
Right.
And so it would appear that her life really changed. And I just have to accept that based on what I think I understand of it.
So, sure. Does her sin as a harlot, did that separate her from God? This is not a trick question. Yeah, sin separated her from God. And probably a lot of sin before she became a harlot. What about Marty Kessler's sin? Did Marty Kessler's sin ever separate him from God? Just as far as Rahab was. And I was just as in need of Jesus Christ as she was in need of God. So that's where we all are. That's the bottom line of the gospel. Paul?
I don't want to beat this dead horse. We're very fixated with what she was. The fact that she was a prostitute. I don't think it's a coincidence. You have what I think is the oldest profession, the oldest work in the world, and it is universally looked down upon. It doesn't matter what culture you're in throughout all history. No one ever esteemed a prostitute. It was always kind of accepted that was wrong. Whereas maybe a tax collector, not in all cultures would that be seen as something negative or bad. Whereas that profession is universally accepted as kind of the bottom of the barrel. So I don't think it's a coincidence that the story is about her.
So it's interesting you make that point. When God sent prophets to Israel, what did they, across the board, accuse Israel of except spiritual prostitution, spiritual harlotry? When James, we're just reading in James, what's he going to say to the church in the next chapter? You adulterers and adulteresses. So this idea of harlotry being the worst possible sin, or we get fixated on it. Well, what did Jesus say about lust? If you've looked on a woman with lust, you've committed adultery where? In your heart. And that's the crux of the matter. And so God has sent his son, and understanding what Jesus has done for us and what God has done through Jesus and the sacrifice that both of them made, and the Holy Spirit's right in there, that should be enough to change our hearts. Don?
A lot, just because we're pursuing questions. I didn't really know about Rahab and how she, what had happened after the Hebrews took over, and I guess I always speculated that she kind of maybe did a 180-degree turn on her life. What I'm hearing tonight is that's most likely happened. But what I also wanted to just bring up was about what John brought up, was about her lying. And I watch a lot of World War II movies when the Nazis were taking over all these countries. And I see a lot of the shows show individual people hiding Jewish kids, Jewish people. And these people, when the Nazis come to the door, they have to lie, or they're going to kill these people. They have to flat out lie to them. And these were people trying to do what is good. And I've always looked at her as that way. And I'm not condoning lying in the sense of when you're trying to profit yourself, or you're trying to hide something so you don't receive a punishment, or something, something that's just flat out wrong that you're trying to hide, okay, to benefit yourself. I've never saw her what she did as a lie in the sense of, it's almost legalistic. To say, you've got to do everything just this way when you're trying to save somebody's life. You're not trying to benefit yourself. In fact, you're putting yourself in harm's way by doing that. And so I just see what all those people did for those people, because they saw that this is just a horrific thing that these Nazis are doing, coming and just rounding people up, and they knew they were killing them, and they just hit them and tried to get them out, and they had to do all kinds of crazy stuff.
So
And I look at her the same way.
Right. And life is just so complicated. You want to do the right thing, but sometimes the compulsion, as the examples you're bringing up and the example of Rahab, even the example of David. You remember when David was fleeing from Saul and he went among the Philistines, How did he escape being killed by the Philistines on one occasion? Remember, he acted like he was crazy. He got down on all fours and he drooled and he scribbled and they, oh, he's crazy. Don't kill him. There was something about killing somebody who's a lunatic. But basically, he was pretending something that wasn't the truth. He was lying. And we're not even talking about the situation with Bathsheba. We're talking about a so-called legitimate ruse or deception to fool the bad guys, which is what God says he does, or Paul writes that God does that in 2 Thessalonians. Is it okay to work on the Sabbath if you're Jewish in the first century? I got to put a context on that. No, it's not okay. Well, what if you're going through the grain fields on the Sabbath and you're really hungry? Is it okay to roll the grain in your hands and then eat the grain as it comes out of the husks? If you're with Jesus, it's okay. What did he say? He said the Sabbath was made for the man. Don't get too heavy on the rules if people are putting you in a situation where you have to do wrong to keep the rules. And I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but what's that? Wrong in their eyes, right. We would all agree, oh, you shouldn't lie. We would all agree with that. But if a situation comes up and your lie will save a life of someone who's, somebody breaks into your house and they're going to kill everybody in there, and they say, you got anybody else in this house? What are you going to say? Oh, yeah, my kids are back in this bedroom, and my sister's over there asleep, but don't shoot too loud because you'll wake her up. You're going to lie your head off. No, nobody here but me. And there's the police out that window. Yeah, it's life. It's more complex than what we would like it to be. So, all right, anybody got anything as we close? Appreciate all the commentary. We'll come back next week with another person who either got it right or got it wrong. You'll have to be a good example or a horrible warning.